Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to try and get started. Boy, everybody's being so good. All right. I'm Marvin Fertel, the President and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute. And again, thank you for joining us this morning for our annual update on the nuclear power industry. You have the slides we're using at your seats. We're going to post a text of what I'm using a little later today, and then probably in maybe the beginning or sometime early next week, we're going to post an expanded version of that text, which gives you a lot more detail in some places, which even speaking like I do coming from New York, I could never get through in the time period that we do for this. So you'll have a couple of volumes of that. Once again, in 2015, U.S. nuclear plant performance was outstanding, a tribute to the dedicated men and women who operate and maintain the 99 nuclear reactors that produce approximately 20% of our nation's electricity and 2/3 of our carbon-free electricity. And in the next 3 years or so, we will commission 5 new reactors representing about 6,000 megawatts of new capacity. Unfortunately, in the last 3 years, companies have shut down or announced their intent to shut down 8 nuclear reactors, or about 6,300 megawatts of generating capacity. So our presentation this morning is focused on the efforts underway to ensure that we do not lose any more valuable assets and that we continue to build new reactors when Watts Bar 2, Vogtle 3 and 4, and Summer 2 and 3 are completed. Our message here to state and federal government agencies and regional organizations is direct and simple. We have no time to waste. If we do not demonstrate a greater sense of urgency about addressing the problems in the electricity markets, we will lose more good-performing and non-emitting nuclear plants. Here's what we plan to cover this morning. We'll start with industry performance, recap some of the major events and issues from last year, summarize for you the work underway to offset the economic pressure on some nuclear plants, and close with some thoughts about 2016 and beyond. There is nothing we can do about low natural gas prices or low growth in electricity demand. So the industry is committing substantial resources to things we can control, correcting weaknesses in competitive electricity markets, valuing the attributes of nuclear plants that are not recognized or not fully recognized by the markets, and a major new industry initiative to drive greater efficiency at our plants and reduce costs. Our goal is obviously to minimize the number of nuclear plants shut down because the markets do not recognize their value. Why are we doing this? Well, we're not doing it because we're concerned that a few plant shutdowns in the short term have implications for the industry's long-term future. Like most industries, the nuclear energy industry experiences periods of economic stress. 10 U.S. nuclear reactors shut down during the 1990s, and the industry emerged from the down cycle more productive and more profitable. The long-term fundamentals suggest to us the same will happen again. So we're doing everything we can to preserve our operating nuclear energy assets because we believe it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for the highly skilled people who operate and maintain these plants and all those whose livelihood depends on the plant. It's the right thing to do for the towns and counties and states in which these plants operate, and it's the right thing to do for consumers and customers that we have of electricity. The green bars on this slide show the average cost of electricity from our nuclear plants, the fleet average and the average for multi-unit plants and single-unit plants. The most costly nuclear plants, the smaller single-unit stations, produced electricity on average for approximately $44 a megawatt hour in 2014. It might be possible to find cheaper electricity off the grid for a short time, for as long as there's spare gas-fired combined cycle capacity and spot gas available below $2 per million BTUs, which we don't believe is continuing to be sustainable. But sooner or later, that nuclear capacity must be replaced. And when it is replaced with new gas-fired combined cycle capacity, consumers will pay more on a levelized cost basis. The blue bars on the slide show various estimates of the levelized cost of electricity from a new gas-fired combined cycle plant, from the Energy Information Administration, from an integrated resource plan filed recently by a regulated utility, and from Lazard. All are well above the cost of electricity from even the single-unit nuclear sites. No one has yet given us a satisfactory answer to the question of why it makes sense to shut down a carbon-free $44 per megawatt hour nuclear plant that produces 600 or so direct jobs and replace it with a $60 to $70 per megawatt hour gas-fired plant that provides maybe 30 jobs and has roughly one-half the carbon emissions of a coal-fired power plant. So let's look at the industry performance in 2015 now. In terms of reliability and productivity, 2015 was another solid year. We estimate average capacity factor was just shy of 92%, which is a record for our industry. We estimate nuclear generation for the year was 798 billion kilowatt hours, a bit higher than 2014, even though we had one less plant operating. We won't have the 2015 cost data until mid-year, but in 2014, U.S. nuclear plants operated about $36 per megawatt hour fleet average. The second year of declining costs since the peak of about $40 per megawatt hour in 2012. The first quartile continued to operate below $30 per megawatt hour, and the second quartile is about $34 per megawatt hour. That is total generating cost, which includes fuel, operating and maintenance cost, and capital. We invested about $6.5 billion in the plants in 2014, about the same as 2013, and a 26% decrease from the $8.7 billion in CapEx in 2012. As you know, CapEx runs in cycles. We put a large number of nuclear plants in service in a relatively short period of time, so we should expect to see periodic surges in CapEx as major components and equipment are replaced and upgraded. For several years, we've been expecting to see some moderation in capital spending, and we believe we saw the first signs of that in 2013 and 2014. For example, capital investment in power uprates peaked at $2.5 billion in 2012, but declined to $315 million in 2014. CapEx for compliance with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's requirements was about one-third of total CapEx in 2014. Capital spending to meet regulatory requirements was about $1 billion a year in 2007 and 2008, before reaching a peak of almost $2 billion in 2014. This increase began with significant investment in security post 9/11, followed by expenditure for a Fukushima response, which totaled about $1 billion in 2014. As we complete the Fukushima-related safety enhancements, and we expect to be substantially complete with Fukushima response by the end of this year, we expect regulatory CapEx to moderate substantially and revert towards the 2007-2008 level. Operating costs have also increased over the last 12 years, from $19 per megawatt hour in 2002 to about $21 per megawatt hour in 2014. Operating costs have actually declined a little over the last 4 years. Moving on from plant performance, I'd like to highlight several key issues and activities from last year. The Tennessee Valley Authority completed construction of the second reactor at its Watts Bar station and received its operating license last October. The plant has loaded fuel and is conducting the testing necessary before full power operation, which is expected about mid-year. The 4 reactors at Summer and Vogtle are expected to come online in 2019 and 2020. Last year was notable for the major changes announced last October that will improve project management and cost and schedule certainty. The project sponsors and their suppliers restructured their engineering procurement construction contracts to resolve their disputes, and the agreements also ended litigation over disputed costs. An opportunity is to figure out how to continue new plant construction after the Vogtle and Summers projects are completed to take advantage of the lessons learned. 6 other combined license applications representing 10 new reactors, or about 12,500 megawatts of generating capacity, are under active review at the NRC, including several that reference the reactor designs being built at Vogtle and Summer. In our view, when Vogtle and Summer are completed and operating is precisely the time for projects that reference the AP1000 design to move forward towards construction, assuming a need for the power or a need to replace existing carbon-emitting generating capacity. The detailed design and engineering on the AP1000 will have been completed. In addition, the lessons from these 2 projects can be applied immediately to new projects, before those lessons are forgotten. It appears that the time to market for the Vogtle and Summer projects will be about 10 to 12 years. Since the next AP1000 projects will have already received and banked their combined construction and operating license for a design that is already certified, it should be possible to reduce time to market to the time required for construction, closer to 4 to 5 years. We're also seeing continued progress on the small modular reactor. The lead developer, NuScale Power, plans to file its application for design certification with the NRC before the end of this year. NuScale is aiming for first commercial deployment in the early 2020s and has a large public power entity in the West lined up as its potential first customer. Coming along behind them, with commercial deployment expected in the 2030s, is a new generation of even more advanced reactors. One organization recently found nearly 50 companies backed by about $1.5 billion in venture capital, names like Transatomic, X-Energy, TerraPower, and others. These advanced reactors were the centerpiece of a first-ever White House summit on nuclear energy last November. They're also receiving growing financial support from the Department of Energy. Just a few weeks ago, DOE selected two companies, X-Energy and Southern Company Services, to develop advanced nuclear reactor designs. Both projects consist of industry-led teams, including other companies, research institutions, universities, and national laboratories. DOE's initial investment will be $6 million for each project, with matching funds from both companies, and DOE could provide up to $80 million for both projects over several years. The industry has significantly improved safety at U.S. nuclear power plants through prudent post-Fukushima investments. Essentially, all U.S. reactors have implemented the NRC's post-Fukushima safety requirements ahead of the NRC's schedule. The industry has managed its response to Fukushima while avoiding costly new requirements that would have provided little safety benefit. For example, the NRC decided against a requirement to install reactor containment vent filters, an avoided cost of at least $1.6 billion, which would have added no significant safety benefit if we spent it. Remember that the root cause of the Fukushima accident was lack of electric power and lack of water to cool the reactor core and use fuel pools. So the centerpiece of the U.S. industry's response to Fukushima is our strategy called FLEX. The FLEX approach adds portable equipment, pumps, generators, and the like at diverse locations around the plant site. The strategy requires that the plant sites obtain, prepare, and maintain portable equipment that connect to a variety of locations. This ensures that we can always maintain the flow of cooling water and provide a continuous supply of electricity. In addition to having these equipment pre-staged at all 61 sites, we operate 2 centers for additional critical equipment. The centers are located near Memphis and Phoenix and are capable of delivering supplemental emergency equipment to any of America's nuclear plants within 24 hours. This is yet another layer of equipment that will enable them to manage an extended loss of electrical power and/or cooling water supply. The global market for commercial nuclear technology is a tremendous opportunity for U.S. suppliers. There are 66 reactors under construction around the world today, and another 158 reactors on order or planned. The Department of Commerce estimates that the global market, including fuel and services, could be as large as $750 billion over the next 10 years. The international nuclear energy business is fiercely competitive, and U.S. suppliers generally compete against state-owned enterprises, but U.S. industry is well positioned. American companies have the most advanced and innovative technologies and designs, whether the advanced passive safety designs for large reactors or the small modular reactors now being developed, which may be particularly appropriate for developing economies. Last year saw a major referendum in Congress on America's position in the world's nuclear energy market, with a positive outcome on all major issues. After a bruising political struggle in Congress, which pitted the American business community against politicians at both ends of the political spectrum, the Export-Import Bank was reauthorized for 4 years. Ex-Im Bank is critical for U.S. nuclear suppliers to compete in the international market. 2 major nuclear cooperation agreements with China and South Korea were renewed during the 4th quarter. and the Department of Energy finalized its nuclear export rules, modernizing a cumbersome process that put American companies at a competitive disadvantage next to other supplier nations. As you know, our plants are licensed initially to operate for 40 years. To date, 81 reactors have received a first 20-year license renewal. 11 reactors have filed applications for renewal and are under NRC review, and the remaining 6 reactors have announced their intention to apply. We are also preparing to operate our plants beyond 60 years. By 2030, several nuclear power reactors in the U.S. will have been generating electricity for 60 years, and by 2040, half of the nation's nuclear fleet will have turned 60. Some of this capacity will likely seek a second license renewal to operate past 60 years. The regulatory process here is well established, and the NRC affirmed last year that the existing process needs no revision. The industry, DOE, and the NRC are conducting extensive research and development on managing aging issues safely during the second 20-year license renewal period. The research has shown that there are no generic technical issues that would prevent a nuclear plant from operating safely beyond 60 years. Last November, Dominion Virginia Power became the first company to announce its intent to file a second license renewal application for its 2-unit Surrey nuclear power plant. Surrey is a pressurized water reactor. In the near term, we expect the boiling water reactor licensee to announce its intent to begin the NRC process for a second license renewal. Deciding whether or not to pursue second license renewal will be a business decision. Does the capital investment required make sense given business conditions at the time? Let's turn to the initiatives underway to create additional margin for all of our plants. This has 2 main components: increasing revenue and reducing costs through greater efficiency. The industry started several years ago to work on increasing value by correcting weaknesses in competitive electricity markets and seeking to monetize the attributes of nuclear power plants that are not recognized or not fully recognized by the competitive markets. These efforts are beginning to bear fruit. Nuclear plants in competitive markets face the cumulative impact of several negative forces, including sustaining low natural gas prices, which are suppressing prices in wholesale power markets, relatively low growth, and in some markets, no growth in electricity demand, federal and state mandates for renewable generation, which suppress prices, particularly during off-peak hours. Some parts of Illinois see negative prices for as much as 10 to 11% of the off-peak hours. Transmission constraints, which require power plants to pay a congestion charge to move their power onto the grid. Some nuclear plants at particularly congested points on the grid see congestion charges of $5 to $10 per megawatt hour. Market designs that do not compensate the baseload nuclear plants for the value they provide to the grid, and market policies and practices that tend to suppress prices. Given the large number of factors causing the stress, it's no surprise that there's no single simple solution. In a number of cases, Illinois, Ohio, New York, we see the states taking steps to implement policy changes that would preserve existing nuclear plants. States also have tools available under the Clean Power Act to preserve their nuclear energy assets, although Tuesday's Supreme Court decision to stay the rule obviously throws the future of the Clean Power Plan into doubt. The industry is pursuing reform in both capacity markets and energy markets, and there has been significant improvement on the part of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and a number of the regional transmission organizations to address some of the underlying problems. Last year, for example, FERC approved a proposal from PJM to reform its capacity market to provide additional compensation to generating resources, like nuclear power plants capable of sustaining predictable operation. This so-called capacity performance resources are expected to be available and capable of providing energy and reserves when needed and will face substantial penalties if they are not. PJM held its first capacity auction for the 2018-2019 delivery year in August 2015, and 2 transitional auctions in September. In all 3 auctions, the capacity performance resources cleared at significantly higher prices than previous auctions that did not include a capacity performance product. In another regional transmission organization, MISO recently indicated that the MISO zone in southern Illinois, home to the Clinton nuclear plant, may not be providing a price signal sufficiently in advance that will result in efficient investment in new resources or to sustain investment in existing resources. There's clear evidence that these market reforms can work. They provide a short-term reprieve to certain plants last year, but by themselves, they are not enough. Unfortunately, we're already seeing the gains from capacity performance eroded by the continuing deterioration in the energy markets. We've had disappointments, to be sure. New England ISO proposed last year to include nuclear units in its winter reliability program, recognizing correctly that the nuclear plants provide similar reliability, if not better reliability, to dual-fuel power plants. Unfortunately, FERC denied the proposal last September, and Entergy cited that denial as one of the several factors that prompted its decision to shut down the Pilgrim nuclear plant. In the energy markets where baseload plants generate most of their revenue, accurate price formation is absolutely essential. Price formation issues are complicated, but the goal is relatively simple. Ensure that all costs necessary to operate the system are reflected in the locational marginal prices. Transparent, accurate price formation breaks down when grid operators take actions that deviate from a least cost dispatch approach. In such cases, system operators manually dispatch a resource that is needed to resolve a constraint or address a reliability concern, but those costs do not show up in the clearing price. The RTOs provide make-whole payments, or what they call uplift payments, to those resources. This uplift tends to suppress price signals and inhibit accurate price formation. It's almost impossible to generalize because uplift is highly specific to a host of circumstances, but the price suppression in aggregate can be substantial, as the example on this slide shows. NEI has been working with the Edison Electric Institute and the Electric Power Supply Association on this issue for some time. On this slide, you can see the remedies we proposed. The goal, to encourage FERC to take action to address a number of operating practices common to the RTOs that tend to distort price signals or suppress prices in the energy market. FERC has developed an exhaustive record on price formation issues, starting with a series of technical conferences in late 2014. Last September, FERC took a first step with a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NOPR, that would revise its regulations governing how the regional transmission organizations set prices in the energy markets. The agency followed the NOPR with an order directing the RTOs to report back on how they manage various price formation issues, including uplift. And last month, FERC proposed another change to its regulations in this area. The most recent proposal would change the policy on ORFA caps and would allow the RTOs to use the higher of $1,000 per megawatt hour or a cost-based offer. FERC's first step, the NOPR last September, addressing settlement intervals and shortage pricing, proposed two changes. The first would require that each RTO settle energy transactions in its real-time markets at the same time interval it dispatches energy. Any misalignment between dispatch and settlement intervals may distort the price signal. The second change would require that RTOs trigger shortage pricing for any dispatch interval during which a shortage occurs. There's an obvious problem if there's a delay between the time when a system experiences shortage and the time when prices reflect the shortage condition. Although welcome, the two changes FERC proposed last summer have been described by some as low-hanging fruit. These are issues that influence the real-time market, but revenues to the baseload nuclear units is determined more in the day-ahead market. So closing the gap between day-ahead and real-time markets is also essential. As we've said many times at these meetings, in fact, some nuclear plants are struggling because the electricity markets do not recognize the attributes of nuclear power plants and the distinct value they bring to the electric supply system, including their carbon abatement value. Nuclear energy is by far America's largest source of carbon-free electricity, and that attribute should increase its value as in the United States and in the rest of the world grapples with the challenge of climate change. Regardless of what happens with the Clean Power Plan, it is clear that nuclear energy is indispensable to any credible program to reduce carbon emissions. States have a number of options to recognize the carbon-free value of their nuclear plants and thereby ensure that this generating capacity remains in operation. Several states, Illinois, New York, North Carolina, are considering various clean energy standards. It's obviously impossible to speculate about the outcome of the litigation over the legality of the Clean Power Plan, but the plan as proposed did provide states options that would preserve their existing nuclear facilities. The Clean Power Plan gives states two compliance options: a rate-based approach, in which individual sources or the state as a whole must meet an emission rate measured in pounds per megawatt hour, or a mass-based approach, in which the state must simply meet a cap measured in tons of CO2. EPA clearly prefers the mass-based compliance option, and the regulation is structured to move the states in that direction. Both EPA and the states are familiar with mass-based programs because they've used them for other pollutants. They're also familiar with mass-based trading programs in which emitting sources must hold an allowance for every ton of the pollutant released. Under the Clean Power Plan, there are mechanisms available in a mass-based system that would recognize nuclear plants' compliance value and preserve existing nuclear capacity if the states choose to use them. A state can, for example, include both existing sources of CO2 emissions and new sources under its cap. In a mass-based compliance regime that includes new and existing sources, closing a nuclear power plant would have consequences. That plant's generation would be replaced in such a way that the state's electric generating units do not exceed the cap. In parallel with our efforts to generate additional revenue and increase asset value, we have also launched an industry-wide program to drive greater efficiency across the industry. We call this initiative Delivering the Nuclear Promise, Advancing Safety, Reliability, and Economic Performance. We are analyzing our operations to determine where we can improve efficiency. This multi-year program is identifying opportunities for efficiency measures, cost reductions, and technology solutions that could be implemented industry-wide to advance safety and improve operations. We will always maintain our commitment to safety and reliability. In fact, I'm confident that safety will continue to improve because our staff will be focused on high-priority work and not distracted by less significant issues. The program was developed by chief nuclear officers from across the industry. It will also leverage the expertise of industry organizations like NEI, the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, and the Electric Power Research Institute. Teams of industry experts have identified initial areas where cost efficiencies or process improvements may be gained. The pace and scope of implementation at each nuclear power plant site will be determined by the company that owns and operates it. The goal is to achieve significant and sustainable cost savings by 2018 and beyond. We established these goals to be deliberately aggressive and aspirational, to signal that we are not looking for minor incremental improvements to the status quo, but more revolutionary, game-changing innovations and improvements. But as you can see from the walk down through the numbers on the slide, we believe the goal is realistic and achievable. For example, the $3 per megawatt hour estimated reduction in CapEx through 2020 would bring the fleet average down to approximately the level we saw in 2004 before we embarked on replacement of steam generators, reactor vessel heads, and power uprates across our industry. The $2 per megawatt hour reduction in fuel costs would bring us back to pre-2008 levels when uranium and enrichment costs were higher than today, given the lead time between when fuel is purchased, when it is placed in the reactor. The higher fuel costs in 2014 are the result of fuel purchased several years ago. Step one in the plan was to analyze the cost data to understand what is driving operating costs so that we could identify opportunities to improve. We could see clearly where the major cost increases have occurred, and that gave us signposts as we charted a path towards greater efficiency. For example, we could see that 4 activities, work management, planning, and execution, the corrective action program, and training, were major cost drivers and accounted for about 50% of the industry's operating budget. Based on analysis of the cost drivers, we created teams, each led by a chief nuclear officer, to develop specific improvement opportunities. That was last October. By year's end, the teams had produced over 180 improvement ideas that were successfully reviewed and refined until approximately 50 ideas were identified for pursuit in 2016. The teams are developing specific improvement opportunities. These will be distributed via new NEI efficiency bulletins and will be endorsed by IMPO to assure adherence to our highest safety and reliability standards. We're excited about what we can achieve as an industry, but we're also encouraged by what we see at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In parallel with our efforts to improve efficiency, we are seeing progress on an initiative designed to address the cumulative impact of NRC regulatory actions. The agency has grown over the years from approximately 3,000 employees in 2004 to approximately 4,000 employees in 2014, a 25% increase. Likewise, the NRC budget from about $626 million to $1 billion, a 60% increase over the same 10-year period. The industry will always spend what is necessary to ensure safety and reliability. But over the years, the number of regulatory requirements continues to increase, including some 47 rulemaking proposals now under consideration. The companies that operate nuclear plants must devote resources to comply with these requirements, some of which do little to enhance safety. NEI has recommended changes in the NRC's process of evaluating proposed regulatory actions of all types, including termination of rulemakings that would impose significant cost with little or no safety or security benefit. Under the leadership of NRC Chairman Stephen Burns, the NRC is implementing an initiative called Project AIM, designed to provide recommendations for improving performance, to develop realistic projections of the workload for the agency 5 years out, and to make recommendations for agency budget and workforce to guide, quote, right-sizing of the agency. And we're seeing the first fruits of this effort. In 2015, the Commission directed the staff to set priorities for regulatory actions. The NRC terminated a number of activities last year, generally because the cost and resources required were not nearly commensurate with the benefits. In closing, a few thoughts about the future. For the last several years, during these briefings for the financial community and in other forums throughout the year, we have suggested several basic principles that should govern our thinking about electricity markets and guide our efforts to structure these markets for a sustainable future. We are convinced that there was nothing wrong with any of the nuclear plants that have shut down for market-related reasons, or any of those at risk. Kewaunee, Vermont Yankee, and others were all solid performers. Highly reliable plants with high capacity factors and relatively low generating costs. Even the Pilgrim nuclear plant, which faces some regulatory issues, posted an 89.2% average capacity factor from 2012 to 2014. The nuclear plants at risk in Weston PJM are producing in the low $30 per megawatt hour range. For those plants, there's clearly something wrong with the markets in which they're operating. They're not structured to recognize the value of the resources in place. They're not operated so that all costs are reflected in prices. They're distorted by out-of-market revenues and mandates. As we consider solutions to this set of problems, this leads us back to simple economic principles. Goods and services will only be produced in a competitive market when they are priced and valued in that market. There really are no free goods. We cannot continue to think of electricity as an undifferentiated bulk commodity. Every kilowatt hour of electricity on the grid has a unique set of attributes, depending upon how it is produced. So, for example, electricity generated from wind is carbon-free, a valuable attribute. But it is not dispatchable, and it tends to be correlated inversely with demand, i.e., the wind generally blows at night when the electricity is needed the least. Electricity from coal-fired power plants is dispatchable, a valuable attribute, and it has reserves of fuel on site, another valuable attribute, but it's not carbon-free. On-site fuel supply and the ability to run when needed is a valuable attribute. It deserves compensation. The New England ISO and the PJM recognize this. Other ISOs have not yet evolved to that point. So every kilowatt hour of electricity on the grid has a distinct pedigree. If we don't identify the attributes and incorporate them into our decision-making and value them in our market, design and market policies, then companies will stop providing those attributes. That, of course, is what's been happening. Here are the attributes of nuclear energy. You can see that nuclear electricity is a premium product. As you go through this list of attributes, you can also see that a number of them price stability, grid support, clean air compliance value, portfolio value, and so forth, need to be recognized and valued whether the plant is in a regulated state or in an organized market. As I said at the beginning, if we do not recognize and value these attributes in both the competitive markets and the regulated markets, we will continue to lose these valuable baseload generating capacity that drive our 4 trillion kilowatt-hour economy 24/7. Sustainable market design demands consideration of all the factors that constitute a robust and resilient market. Among other things, those factors include short-term price, long-term price stability, the value of fuel and technology diversity, environmental factors, and others. Short-run cost is an important and necessary metric, but solving this complex equation for that one variable only, lowest possible short-run electricity price, will not produce a reliable, resilient, and affordable system for the long term, nor will it ensure we meet our environmental goals. We're seeing early signs that states and federal policymakers are beginning to recognize these simple facts. And we're seeing early signs that they're beginning to recognize that nuclear energy's value proposition, shown on this slide in summary form, is too large to lose. But as I said at the start, we are not doing enough fast enough to establish the policies necessary to preserve existing nuclear assets. Instead, we're driving companies to make decisions that our nation will regret for the next 20 or 30 years or longer on the basis of short-term, unsustainable price signals. With that, let me close and open the floor to the good questions that you all asked me. So, thank you. So I'll take questions from anyone.
Can you touch upon nuclear waste and what's being done on that front?
Sure. You notice I didn't talk about nuclear waste because what's being done with nuclear waste, in all honesty, is we're managing it very safely and very responsibly at our sites because our government has not moved forward either under the requirements of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which would have them go forward and finish licensing Yucca Mountain, or to be honest, they really haven't moved forward with any gusto under President Obama's blue ribbon panel that looked at what you should do. They have come out now and are looking at a solicitation on consent-based siting, but in the last 9 months of the administration, they're probably not going to make a lot of progress on that. We will continue to manage the waste very safely at the sites. We will also push very hard after this next election to see if we can move legislation through. There is legislation that both the House and Senate would like to move. I think with the amount of time left in the legislative session right now, we won't see it in this Congress. And it would likely not go anywhere since it will include Yucca Mountain, at least in the House bill, through the Senate. Senator Reid is retiring at the end of this year, which opens up the opportunity for actually constructive dialogue in the Senate, which you can't have while Senator Reid is there. And whoever the new president is, we hope that they'll see a bill that comes through. The industry has been pretty consistent in advocating a number of things in nuclear waste. We want to finish Yucca Mountain's licensing and determine whether we can go there. It's currently the law of the land. We've spent a fortune studying Yucca Mountain. We ought to find out if it's acceptable. And if it's not, we'll learn how to do another repository. We also think that you should create an organization that's dedicated to working the nuclear waste issue, not leaving it in the Department of Energy. We think you should have a separate organization. It's not a few-year, let's license Yucca Mountain thing or a different repository. It's a 100-plus year responsibility because you're going to take the waste from our current plants. It's going to take a long time. You're going to have to find a repository if it's not Yucca, and even if it is Yucca. So we think we need an organization that's dedicated to that with the right capabilities in it. We support interim storage because you can't get to any repository, even Yucca Mountain, quickly. And we would like to get the waste off sites that are shut down. We're spending money for nothing, no generation at some of those sites. They just are protecting an ISFAC, Independent Spent Fuel Storage Facility. So we'd like to get that to basically an interim storage facility. We'd like to go forward with a consent-based process for even a second repository that might be necessary. And we want to make sure we get access to the $30 billion that's in the Nuclear Waste Fund. okay? Because right now, it's not clear we can get access to that. This is money that has been paid for, dedicated, and actually, it's even a little bit more, I would think the strings are even tighter than what we have in Social Security, which doesn't have money in it either. In our case, they have contracts. Every company has a contract for that plant with the government. So you actually have a legal contract that you're paying 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour, and they're going to take your waste. So those are our agenda. I would not expect to see anything substantial. I think the House will hold hearings. We may even see a hearing in the Senate. So educating in Congress, getting ready for the next Congress is a good thing. But I don't expect we're going to see any legislation move forward and get signed into law in this Congress. But we will continue to manage the waste very safely at the sites. It's just that we should be moving forward with ultimate solution on it. Other questions?
Hi, could you talk a bit about the O&M efficiency target improvements that you expect to see, and maybe give a few examples? And you talked about EPRI, INPO, and NEI, but what about the NRC? How involved is the NRC if, for example, you change your processes or procedures or repair methodology? What's the oversight?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, on the goal, as the chief nuclear officers and some of us that talk with them about it, we consciously decided if we said, let's get 5% or 10%, everybody would say, I can get 5%. So we really wanted the goal to be something that forced us to really roll up our sleeves and get smarter, and to be honest, to build efficiency thinking. In the nuclear world, more always seems to be better. So, you know, if I had a procedure that was this big and I made it this big, it must be better. It's not necessarily better. So part of what we're trying to drive is the whole thought that you can go towards excellence in a more efficient way in some cases than we have. So that was the philosophy on the goal. And the 30% reduction is a $12 per megawatt hour reduction because we were using the 2012 year as a baseline. And really, of that 12, we think we're shooting for about $3.50 per megawatt hour because we think the others are built into the drop in capital spending, the change in fuel cost, and then the achievements from 2012 through 2014 already. So to the question of NRC, we brief NRC regularly on this. It's interesting, they're going through, I mentioned Project AIM, which is, you could say, almost a bit analogous. They're looking at how do they make their processes more efficient, how do they get better at prioritizing what's really important from a safety standpoint rather than just taking everything. And part of what we're sharing with them is kind of the way we're looking at change management, because it's not just figure out the best thing, it's how do we change culture at our plants that you're willing to change? Because, like I said, culture right now is more is better. So we're now saying more efficient is actually better, which may mean I do what seems to be less at times. So a good example, I mentioned efficiency bulletins in my comments. So we want this to be sustainable, not just, gee, we're going to work on this for the next 3 years, we're going to come up with a great bunch of ideas, and then it's sort of, okay, let's go back 5 years from now or 10 years from now and do it again. So NEI is issuing what we call efficiency bulletins, which takes some of these improvement opportunities once we really put meat on it and issues it to the industry. 4 of them were issued this week. One very good example to the question that was asked is one of them is on preventive maintenance, okay? So we do lots of preventive maintenance at our facilities, okay? You have a pump, you have a motor, you have valves that are in preventive maintenance programs. So you're not basically waiting till it fails and then fixing it in a corrective maintenance. You're doing things. Sometimes that's like changing oil, okay, for a motor. What we tend to do is every time we do a preventive maintenance activity, we basically start like we never did it before. Okay, so we sit down and we have everybody do their planning, they do new procedures, they review everything. And when you look at that, yes, if there's new information, you know, if there's either something that we've gotten from industry operating experience that tells us, oh, we should change the frequency of doing it, or we should change the way we do it, or we should change the material we use in doing it, yes, that should change it. But nothing is changing in most of these cases, except we treat it like it's a first-time operation, which creates all kinds of administrative stuff. And fundamentally, the people doing the work sit around waiting for that stuff to get done. So one of the efficiency bulletins that got issued this week says, no, don't do that. And in this case, there are no NRC requirements that are being affected, right? This is all the industry. There are IMPO things that they want. So when we issue an efficiency bulletin, what it tells you is what are the guidance documents that are applicable. So if there's an IMPO document that's applicable, you're told. And it will be changed to allow you to do it the way we're saying. IMPO signs off on this, as does our Chief Nuclear Officer, Tony Petrangelo, as does the Chief Nuclear Officer that's heading up that particular activity. So if there was an NRC requirement involved, and there isn't any in the first 5 that we're issuing, what would happen is it would say NRC requirement umpty squat is applicable to this. Its guidance has been changed and approval has been granted. So we're not asking the sites to do anything that either IMPO hasn't signed off on if it's us, or NRC hasn't signed off on before we ask them to do it if there is a regulatory requirement. So they're not intimately involved in us identifying what we want to do. They're intimately involved in us implementing what we identify that we want to do if they have a regulatory requirement. I hope that answers your question. Other questions?
Following on the line of what you just discussed, can you apply that process to determining the value of nuclear energy? In other words, can you build something to help the individual plant owners and the industry to achieve through their state regulation processes some of the things that you'd like to achieve?
I'm not sure I can apply exactly what we're doing to that, but
I'm sure you can't.
well,
That's why I asked.
yeah. We'll have to get your ideas on a call, but the value chart that was up there that showed the value, I think we showed it to this audience. I think we showed it to this audience or some others probably 10 or 12 years ago, but about 4 years ago we started showing it every time. And it seems very obvious that you ought to value attributes that are important, but what I said in my comments and what I've experienced and our people have experienced, and I think almost everybody in the industry, is electricity is so taken for granted in this country by everybody. The only 2 times I think Americans think of electricity, and policymakers are Americans too, is when the lights go out and the bill goes up. They're both bad. So they take it for granted the rest of the time. It's like air. What we're trying to say is nuclear is not alone in that. I mean, as I said, wind has certain good attributes, solar does, gas certainly does. But pricing those attributes, getting them recognized is incredibly important. And it's incredibly important whether you're a regulated utility or you're in an organized market. Because even the regulated utilities are struggling with low demand and renewable portfolio standards that's driving other things in. So I think, Carl, what we're trying to do with the states is we actually think low carbon portfolio standards are what the country should be looking at, not renewable portfolio standards. I thought the goal in America was to reduce carbon emissions, not just build wind and solar. And if that's true, it ought to be a low carbon, and everybody ought to get the ability to kind of play in it. So I think what we're trying to do is do as much as we can to educate on those attributes, you know, whether it's the ancillary services market in a competitive market, and you get value for voltage support, which we don't get much of anything for right now, or you get some clean air value. We get no value for diversity in this country. It used to be really an important thing, but it's not valued very much right now. I mean, gas is not only a game changer, it's a game saver right now.
Just as a follow-on to that, I agree with you, but what I'm asking is, how do you get that in front of the right audiences? And what do you do, if anything, to support the argument that might be made by a given company?
I think actually some of you have probably seen the Nuclear Matters campaign that Senator Evan Bayh and former Senator Judd Gregg have been heading up. And to be honest, Carol Browner, the former energy czar at the White House and longest-serving EPA chairwoman, has been very intimately involved with. Nuclear Matters is going into its 3rd year. It has done, Carl, I think, an excellent job of raising awareness everywhere, in federal space, but particularly in the states. What we need now is that awareness to turn into action. And that requires policy changes. And that's what we're pushing now. The awareness is actually there. People are saying, oh yeah, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize, and it does hurt, but it certainly helps when you're making decisions to shut plants down. You're talking about that risk and you're doing it. So I think the awareness exists. The challenge that we and the companies have right now is taking that awareness and converting it into action. We're pleased that New York and Illinois and now recently North Carolina said something about looking at clean energy standards and beginning to do something in that arena. And I think that's where we're trying to push the dialogue now. NEI interacts a lot with national organizations like the National Council of State Legislators, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, very good rapport with them. We don't go into individual states except with companies. So, we'll work with our member companies in individual states, but on educating like legislators, public service commissioners, we just had people speaking this week to the National Association for Energy Administrators in DC. The education process has been going well. What we need to do now is take it the next step and actually get policies that actually implement some of the stuff we need. And in all frankness, every state is different and every member's needs may be different depending upon where they sit in this collage. But I think on the education, we actually have gotten there faster than I would have thought when we started Nuclear Matters. What we don't have yet is the results that will actually save the plants. We have an awareness and it's like, oh my God, you were right, as opposed to, I did something and I stopped it. And that's our focus now. And it's got to be hand in hand with our members.
Have you got individual members who have accepted that premise and are starting to try something?
Carl's question was, do we have individual members who have accepted that premise and are starting to try something? Obviously, Exelon is very aggressive in Illinois, in trying to get their low carbon portfolio standard and in educating and everything else. First Energy has been aggressive, in Ohio, trying to save the Davis-Besse nuclear station and their coal units. So we're seeing, and Entergy has been aggressive in a number of states and continues to fight battles there. But also our regulated utilities have challenges again. There is, when you don't have much demand and you're driving renewables in, and I'm not at all bad-mouthing renewables, but if I'm driving them in and I don't have a lot of kilowatt hours, something gives. Nuclear plants are very effective at producing electricity 24/7. And they're getting hurt in some places because of the policies that we've sort of grown up incrementally. So the answer is yes, we're seeing some of our members begin to really look at this aggressively. And what we're hoping is either maybe in New York or Illinois, or again, North Carolina's come out recently with some statements. If you can get something that actually works, led by a state, we think that we can try and leverage that to other states that ought to be looking at it, and that's part of the strategy.
Hi, Lori Wiegler. I'm a freelance writer for Institutional Investor. After the Paris Agreement, would you say that nuclear is a harder or a tougher sell to the environmentalists? And explain your answer.
It can't be just a belief. I actually think that nuclear is becoming an easier sell to True environmentalists actually are pretty good with nuclear, okay, because climate is their primary concern. And they're also smart. So I'm not talking about anti-nuclear groups. I'm talking about real environmental groups. I got to know Carol Browner pretty well when she was in the White House, and we were working together on Senate legislation on climate. And Carol was very smart. And Chrissy Todd Whitman, who's been working with us for years, is also very smart. And they've become very strong advocates because of climate. Okay, I don't think Carol would be out there saying, I really need nuclear if we didn't have a climate challenge. She would say, let's do some stuff, but I'm not going to push nuclear. So what we're finding is that environmentalists, responsible environmentalists, are very much supportive of looking at nuclear because they want to deal with climate. Our challenge right now is to help them understand, one, that losing plants makes climate really hard. Let's take New York, you know, the decision that Entergy had to make on Fitzpatrick. Shutting down Fitzpatrick fundamentally doubles the carbon burden that New York State has under the Clean Power Plan. Their goal under the Clean Power Plan was to reduce by 3.3 million tons a year. Fitz reduces 3.2 million tons a year if you replace it with gas. So somehow you can't have it both ways. You can't say, I'm really committed to reducing carbon, but I can shut down nuclear plants. Now, if it's a bad performing plant, that's so, but we're talking about good performing plants. So I think with the environmentalists, and we're trying to work more with them. I think it's hard because, you know, you just watch TV and what's going on with our elections, which is bizarre. But you just, I think what we need to do with environmental leaders is be able to bring them together so that they're not standing on a stage like I am by myself. Because I think that in group, they're braver on some of this. Now, they have questions on waste. We'll deal with that. We hear very little questions, even by anti-nuclear groups, on safety anymore. It's really interesting. Economics is what they'll jump on. But very little on safety. And it's because you've done a lot of stuff to really improve safety. I say this whenever I talk to industry groups too. I am so proud of the people that operate our plants. Their commitment is just phenomenal. We always tell people you ought to go visit a nuclear plant. And the first thing that always impresses people, first thing, is the cleanliness and the physical size. It's very impressive. But the thing that I think always overwhelms that when they leave is the people. That they meet the people, and the commitment and the professionalism and the talent is always win. Even when we take anti-nuclear folks to a plant, they don't convert and support us, but they moderate the way they talk about it. So I think we're going to get more and more support from the environmental community. Oh, I didn't see you there, Len.
Hi. I just wanted to ask about two sort of conflicting currents. On the one hand, you really want to bring down the capital expenditures, presumably the ongoing capital expenditures running a plant. And at the same time, you really are lengthening the lives of the plants. So you're going to have some very, very old plants around. And I was just curious whether you're sort of going into uncharted waters in terms of what capital expenditures will be like.
Yeah, okay, so Len's looking at if we're serious about, I mean, first of all, again, almost all the plants now have gotten to 60 years, so they already have an aging management program in place. Almost all of our plants have changed steam generators. The jury's still out, but if you probably polled 10 people in the industry on do we think we'll have to change steam generators again, you probably get 5 saying yes and 5 saying no. We've got the chemistry much better. We've got the alloys much better. We would hope we don't have to change them again. You might have to. So, but we think big expenditures on capital, we've done it to go from 40 to 60, and we're hoping that we've gotten smarter on operating, that you're not going to have these huge expenditures. The aging management, and the reason the NRC didn't change their rule was that there really isn't a big change. It's sort of human. Age-related degradation is what you worry about, okay, as you get older, whether you're a plant or you're a person, right? And at the plant, Carl said thank you. At the plant, you know, we basically have aging management programs in place that assure you're going to be really good till 60. What we're looking at from 60 to 80 are buried cable. We're looking at large bore pipe, obviously the vessel again, and concrete. And as I mentioned, if the economics are bad, you know, if I had a plant where I got to replace the vessel, you know, or I got to replace steam generator and the vessel, my decision might be not to do license renewal. And it would depend on what the other options are. So the economics, we're hoping that we can aggressively get through. I mentioned Surrey, and we expect a boiling water reactor coming up soon. We want 2 lead plants, both a boiling water and a pressurized water reactor, to go through the NRC process as lead plants to help define the aging management program we're going to need for the plants, which then allows all of us to say, okay, what are the aspects of the facility at my facility, now that I'm looking at it, that I'm going to have to invest in to go beyond 60. So I'm not sure it's a conundrum only in that you need the information. And again, it's timing. We don't see large capital investments right in front of us right now because, you know, we're still quite a ways away from the reaching 60 for most of our plants. And we do think on Fukushima, basically most of the spending, we'll still spend more, but most of the big spending is done on our Fukushima response. I hope that helps, Len.
I was just hoping you could help me understand the difference in thinking at the Como administration when we're looking at Fitzpatrick versus Indian Point.
You live in this city?
I don't.
Well, I think the governor has been very clear on his feelings towards Indian Point. We're actually encouraged, first of all, that what he said about saving Fitzpatrick and, quote, the upstate plants was the importance of those plants from a job standpoint, from a diversity of supply standpoint, from a carbon reduction standpoint. He's got it all right. He just needs to recognize that Indian Point does the same thing in a real big way. So we think all the plants are necessary, but we think the governor's basis for why he wants to save plants is really good, and we hope he talks to his colleagues in other states and tells them they shouldn't be losing nuclear plants if they want to make sure they reduce carbon, they have affordable electricity, they keep jobs, and they maintain a diverse supply. And we would say that includes Indian Point, is what we would say. We understand the history with the governor.
Do you see the RPS-driven increasing reliance on intermittent power as an issue that will people will become more aware of that and maybe develop a little bit more balanced approach to, you know, using baseload power instead of RPS-driven wind power?
Yeah. Again, no offense to intermittent power or the value that wind and solar bring, but the decisions we're making today and the investments we're making, whether it's in renewables or it's in baseload generation or it's in gas or it's in pipelines, are going to be with us for the next 30-plus years. So if we make poor decisions, we're going to get poor outcomes. That's not going to be good. I mean, nuclear is kind of my focus. Electricity is kind of my passion. I think electricity is the lifeblood of our economy, and it's absolutely essential to our quality of life.
But do you see people becoming more aware of that issue and making it an issue?
I would hope so, but I'm not sure. I mean, you know, again, I think that you can look at Germany, you could look at Spain, you could look at places in Europe, and you could say, gee, is there some lesson we could learn from that? And we don't seem to. And that doesn't mean you don't have intermittent power. It does say you got to think about what you're doing because it has long-term implications. I wish I could tell you I'm sure they will, but I'm not sure until we actually begin to have those outcomes in front of us.
You hear advocates making statements like, well, we'll have storage in another year or two, and you know that'll solve the intermittency problem. And I wonder whether they're just being a little bit overly optimistic. You know, somebody like Musk, he acts like it's here right now, and no problem.
I mean, you know, there's the companies, our members are investing a lot in companies that do storage. Storage is a monster game changer, you know, but it's got to be real storage and sustainable storage. Everybody I talk to at EPRI or other places don't think that lithium-ion batteries are the storage that's going to do it for what we need in our country. I mean, we talk microgrids, and microgrids are really potentially very important from a resiliency standpoint. We think small modular reactors may play at some point in microgrids, but you can't take a 4 trillion kilowatt hour plus country in demand and put it on microgrids. You can put things on microgrids, you can do it strategically. So I think that there's enough evidence and people looking at stuff to maybe get smarter, and I have a lot of faith in the people who run our major utilities that they're going to try. I mean, what's in their blood is making sure the lights stay on and everything continues to work. So I think they're going to do their best to make sure that happens. And not get caught up in stuff that doesn't seem real. On the other hand, if you drive, in policy space, certain things, you don't have any choice.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Before you all go, oh, we got a question.
Yeah, could you just give us an update on the, either the U.S. or the international progress scientifically or technologically in waste recycling?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Obviously, the French have been, quote, reprocessing for years. The Japanese have been looking to do it, but they're not starting up yet, and we don't know post-Fukushima, though that's still in their game plan whether they will. I think what I'm seeing happening is that there's a lot more interest right now in going to what we call Generation 4 reactors, which are basically fast neutron reactors in most cases, which actually use waste as part of their fuel. So you may have seen recently that Southern Company has won a DOE grant to look at a molten salt reactor. There is a tremendous number of people in the communities you guys deal with in venture capital space that are investing like $1 billion to $1.5 billion in companies that are looking at Gen 4 reactors. The most famous person looking at a Gen 4 reactor right now is Bill Gates, his TerraPower reactor. And Mr. Gates is basically looking at it for, my understanding, a couple of reasons. One, he's very serious about climate change, so he doesn't want to push something that emits carbon. Two, he spent his life and a lot of his money trying to save lives by dealing with, diseases. But what he understands is that if you don't have electricity, he may prolong your life for a little while, but he can't save your life. So he's got to get you electricity. So he's looking at, how do I get you electricity? How do I not have any emissions? And the third thing he's looking at is, can I have a reactor that doesn't generate waste? So I would say that what I'm seeing is leapfrogging the conventional reprocessing by at least a lot of people who are looking at, let's go to what we call Gen 4 reactors, where you basically have reactors that use the waste as a fuel. And that seems to be a movement. And again, we're getting a lot of non-traditional allies in this country who, because of climate and other things, are really looking at these Generation 4. And these are some venture capitalists who, as you all know, don't usually think a 10-year time period or a 15-year time period is okay. But that's what they're talking about, because you're not going to get these reactors. It's not, I kid, it's not an app. This is really a reactor that you're going to get. So it's a much longer time period. Now, other countries, China is working with the French on reprocessing in a conventional way. So, it's not that reprocessing itself is necessarily going to go away, but the trend I see is actually going to advanced reactors to do that. All right. Just before I let you all run out in the cold weather, I'm retiring at the end of the year, so this is going to be my last presentation to this group. And also, Richard Myers, who many of you know, is also retiring at the end of the year, which you may not know. So one, I would like you to join me in thanking Richard for all the work that he has done with all of you, and then I'll just say a couple more comments. I'd just like to say Rich and I have spent over 20 years probably interfacing with this community and gotten to, have great friends like Carl Seligson and getting to know Len and others in this room. Karen Bird, who has always been wonderful in helping us in the nuclear industry on a whole bunch of fronts. She sits on the EPRI advisory committee. She sits on the IMPO advisory committee. She always is there to help us if we need help. Has been wonderful. You've been a great community and a fun bunch of folks to work with. You're really smart. You ask good questions. You do good work. And NEI will continue to interface with you, even without Richard and I. But we'll both miss the interactions that we've had with you and wish you all the best in the future. So thanks again for all you do, and thanks again for putting up with us.